Hello, everyone. Welcome to the APT's April meeting. Did I get the month right? We in April? Welcome back, Jen. It's an honor tonight to have with us a local Philadelphian, Amy Jane Cohen. Some of you may know her. Josh Silver made the suggestion to bring Amy in last August, and we've been working to get her in. She's been very patient with us, and we're very glad she was able to make it here tonight. This is really a good crowd, so be very well behaved tonight. If you don't know Amy, I'll read about her. She's an educator, historian, and writer. After 20 years teaching social studies, she became director of education for History Making Productions and is a contributing writer for Hidden City, Philadelphia. Following Amy's talk tonight is we're going to do a special presentation for our new certified guides. And Amy's talk is on the Black history in the landscape of Philadelphia.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for having me here. I've been doing tons of book talks, like some weeks, literally the last week of Black History Month, I did 5 in a row. But it didn't occur to me until I got here that this is by far the most intimidating group because you actually know a lot of this history. I mean, I'm used to presenting to groups where like they don't know anything. And anyway, so I always like to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is what's a nice Jewish girl like me doing, writing a book like this? And in order to answer that, I have to go back at least 20 years. When I was teaching a course about the history of Philadelphia at Masterman High School. Oh, awesome. Great. Okay. And I, in 2005, as some of you know, Philadelphia became the first school district in the country to require a year of Black history for every high school student. And at that point, no one in my social studies department had ever taught Black history, and there were no Black teachers in our social studies department, which is pretty typical across the city and the country. Because I had briefly taught this elective in Philadelphia history, I knew something about Philadelphia's Black history because you can't learn or teach about Philadelphia history without teaching about Black history. So with that little bit of knowledge, I volunteered to teach the new course. And it was a very steep learning curve, to say the least. Although the course is African American history nationwide and beginning in Africa, because my little toehold when I started was always local history, I always did a lot of local history in the course, and the students always appreciated it because it made things feel more connected. When I left the classroom, as Mike said, I worked for History Making Productions. Initially, my job was to develop curricula so that teachers could use our films in the classroom. After a while, I also had the opportunity to produce some films, and both in writing the curricula and I produced the Cato film, I continued to learn about and teach and speak about local Black history. And then I started writing for Hidden City, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Hidden City Philadelphia, an online magazine about the built environment. And at one point I was writing for them monthly, and not every article, but many of the articles over the months and years that I wrote for them were about local Black history. So I had this knowledge of Black history and this passion for Black history, but getting to the point where I was confident that I was the right person to write the book took me a little bit. I knew, and probably most of you are aware of this, that there's not kind of a accessible volume that's going to take you from the 1600s to the 20th century and give you an overview of local Black history. There's just not something like that out there. And so I channeled the words of Toni Morrison. If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And that was what kind of gave me the final push to say, I'm going to try and write this thing. So what I want to do this evening is talk first about the US real quickly, and then we'll look at Philadelphia, and then we will look at 2 case studies from the book. And again, this is going to be a very different experience asking you this question than other audiences. But which individual historic figures are most frequently represented in American monuments? So which specific name people across the country are you most likely to see on a granite pillar, in a bronze statue? And you can just say, okay. All right. Well, you guys collect. That is true. And that was one of my first articles for Hidden City was about him. That was really interesting. And someone said Lafayette, which I'm sure there are a lot of. However, I'm going to share with you the top 6. And collectively, you only got 1 and 2. So number 6 is Robert E. Lee. And just kind of think about that, ruminate about that. All this information I'm sharing with you is from a census that Monument Lab, based here in Philadelphia, did that was published in 2021. So maybe there have been a few Lee statues taken down, but it's pretty shocking. Number 5, no one ever guesses, even when I've been in Catholic schools, St. Francis of Assisi. Number 4, no one expects, but it's Martin Luther King. Number 3, Christopher Columbus, which of course in Philadelphia has been a subject of controversy. And then, as many of you said, number 2 is George Washington. And I will have to admit, I grew up in Center City. I live now in Mount Airy, and I taught at Masterman, so I have gone up and down the Parkway more times in my life that I could possibly count. And it wasn't until I was putting this presentation together that I realized that was George Washington and the fountain on Aiken's Oval. In my defense, there's a lot going on that fountain. And there's a lot of guys on horseback on stat everywhere, but yep, that's him. And then, yeah, exactly. And then Abraham Lincoln is actually number 1. Philadelphia, our statue on Kelly Drive was erected in 1871, which makes it one of the earliest in the country. And when it was dedicated, 50,000 people came out. Another question for you. Hold up your fingers. Of the 50 most represented figures, how many are people of color? You got it. 4. Yes. There are 4 people of color in the top 50. How many are female? You are a really cynical bunch of tour guides. There's actually 3. However, There are 10 times as many statues of mermaids as there are of female congresswomen. So, and then a more serious question, and you don't have enough fingers or toes. Of the top 50, how many are enslavers? 25. So fully half of the people in our traditional statue type monuments enslaved people. And again, this is from Monument Lab. And just to tell you who the people of color and the women are, Dr. King, Joan of Arc, she's actually number 18. Harriet Tubman, Sacagawea, Tecumseh, and Frederick Douglass. The rest are white guys and many of those enslavers, which actually that means that more than half of the white guys are enslavers. Were. And Monument Lab at the end of this study reached 4 conclusions. And it's a fascinating piece. You can find it online. One is that monuments have always changed, which is really interesting given the controversy that comes up when statues are sometimes removed. The monument landscape is overwhelmingly white and male. The most common figures in American monuments reflect war and conquest. And finally, the story of the United States, as told by our current monuments, misrepresents our history. Or, as New York Magazine put it, the nation's monuments are male, pale, and stale. So now let's look at Philadelphia for a minute. In terms of real official monuments with Black people in Philadelphia, this one, the All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors, it's now between Logan Circle and the Franklin Institute. However, for 60 years, it was up near Belmont Mansion. The state representative, a Black man who came up with the idea, got the legislation passed, always envisioned it on the Parkway, but the all-white art jury said no. They offered Fittler Park, which is now Fittler Square, but it wasn't like the bougie place it is now. I tell the whole story in the book, but so we have this that it took until the 1990s to get it to its rightful place. And then, of course, okay, in 27, that's, yeah, so that's, that was the unveiling in 2017. So it took until 2017 until there was a statue on public land in Philadelphia of an individual African American, and that was Octavius Catto. The timing of that was kind of beautiful in that it was the summer following the Unite the Right rally. So when the whole country was talking about monuments and should we change monuments, it coincided with Philadelphia unveiling this pretty spectacular memorial. And I've done a lot of Caddo related work. So after the monument went up, I couldn't help myself from just kind of hanging out. And these were the kinds of scenes that I saw. So if people say, well, monuments don't really matter, who cares? People just walk by. That was not at all the experience I had witnessing how people, particularly people of color, reacted to the monument. So they're really, until we get Harriet Tubman, which is in the works, Marian Anderson seems to be in the pipeline. Other than that, we really have those two on public land. So how did I write a whole book about Black history in the Philadelphia landscape? Well, I talk about those two monuments, but many other things as well. And I'm sure as tour guides, you interact with this stuff all the time. Other than monuments, how do we honor historic people, events, and institutions in the landscape? That's a question. Plaques, schools, murals, road signs, street names. Yeah, you guys pretty much aced that because um, so I want to speak first about markers because that's some of what really got me into thinking about history as represented in the landscape. When I was teaching that History of Philadelphia elective back in 2004, some students of mine applied for a historical marker to commemorate an anti-Black riot that took place in 1842. And that marker application was accepted. It's on 6th and Lombard on the southeast corner, right across from Mother Bethel Church. And that really taught me that normal people, regular people, have a voice in saying what history is told to us by our landscape. And the history told to us by our landscape really is a collective representation of values. In 1983, this marker about the first protest against slavery was installed on Germantown Avenue. And Worcester and Germantown at Freedom Square, yes. Freedom Square is the name of the strip mall that is there, but yes, Germantown and Worcester, exactly. And in 1984, a marker was installed on 5th Street, just below Walnut Street, where Absalom Jones opened the African American Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. And so it was said that these were the only two African American history markers, but I don't consider the first one really to be an African American history marker so much because there's no Black agency in it. Charles Blockson, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, a collector of books, journals, artwork, sheet music, artifacts, all kinds of things related to the Black experience, realized that there was a real dearth of these markers and so much Black history in Philadelphia that he got grant money in the early 1990s and was able to get literally dozens of markers installed. And with that as a base, in Philadelphia now about a third of our state markers do relate to African American history. This is a picture, Charles Blockson is shown there on the left for those of you who can see it, pulling off the cover of a sign, a marker that was installed in 2016. So it was a later marker about the Pennsylvania slave trade. It's on the Delaware River near the Independent Seaport Museum, at least for now. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with all the changes down there. But I have this marker there for two reasons. One is that Charles Blockson himself, he passed away exactly a year ago, said this was the marker of which he was most proud. And secondly, I have it there because it gives you a sense of the chronology of the book. So it starts, way back with the early years of Black people in Philadelphia, which were mainly enslaved. And now I'm switching to murals. And the reason I have this mural of Father Paul Washington, he was a pastor at the Church of the Advocate on Diamond Street in North Philadelphia. His church became a kind of home base for the Black Power movement in Philadelphia. There were Black Panther Party meetings held there and so forth. And that's the other chronological bookend. is I go to the late 1960s, early 1970s Black Power era in Philadelphia in terms of the history, in terms of changing the landscape, that continues. This is a school on South 12th Street that used to be called the Andrew Jackson School. It was a very diverse school in South Philadelphia. And the school community decided that they didn't want the name of a president who was an enslaver, who was responsible for the massacre of, huge numbers of Native Americans representing their school. So they did a community engagement process, and eventually the name Fanny Jackson Coppin was chosen. She was a teacher at the Institute for Colored Youth, same school where Octavius Catto taught. Yes, at 9th and Bainbridge, there's a marker for the Institute for Colored Youth. Okay, another kind of public space other than a school, a train station. This is actually very close to my home, the Richard Allen Lane train station. Yes, they are. I have right in front of my house, I have a yard sign that says "Save the Train." And actually, even before the SEPTA station was renamed, this block of the street was named for Richard Allen. And there was kind of some poetic beauty in that, because it's probably a quarter mile from the head of Chew Street, named for Benjamin Chew, who was Richard Allen's enslaver. That's in the book. But it's funny because someone was asking me a journalist was asking me the other day about how much I learned. And one of the things I said was I already knew a lot about Richard Allen, but in doing the book, I really had to thoroughly think about where is he represented, and, which murals and which markers and so forth. And he is quite well represented. And you've probably seen a lot of these little red strips under green signs. They're not that hard to get. You present in front of city council. And I asked the city streets department, I was just curious, because maybe it's just the places I drive around, but it seemed to me that a disproportionate number of these street renamings were related to Black history. So I, got in touch with the streets department and asked if there was a list of the honorary street names in Philadelphia. Is anyone surprised that there's no list? No. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And I wish there was a full list, but anyway, there is not. Those aren't that hard to get. Actually changing an entire street name, like when Columbia Avenue in North Philadelphia was renamed for civil rights leader Cecil B. Moore, that's a much more involved process, because it involves the post office, it involves the DMV, because people have to change their driver's license. It's much more complicated. So it's not done all that often. Now, there's been an effort in recent years, really since 2020, to change the name of Taney Street, to rename it for Caroline LeCount, who was, among other things, Octavius Catto's fiance at the time he was assassinated, but she was an educator and activist in her own right, lived well into the 20th century. And Roger Taney, of course, was the Supreme Court justice who wrote the Dred Scott decision, saying that no Black person, enslaved or free, would ever have citizenship. So this seems like kind of a no-brainer. The community has done petition drives, they've had rallies, they've gotten, all kinds of people living on the street to sign it. And yet it hasn't happened. And again, this anyone who wasn't surprised by the lack of list of honorary street names won't be surprised by this either. I always thought of Taney Street as the block near Taney Playground in the Fittler Square area. But Taney also continues into Grays Ferry. There are blocks of Taney, like in Francisville, and somehow it intersects multiple councilmanic districts, and somehow they've never managed to have all of the council members on the same page at the same time to actually have this fairly straightforward, very much desired name change happen. So hopefully that will happen soon. And another way we recognize things is historic sites. Of course, this is the Marian Anderson House. And I just want to take a minute to say, why did I focus on the landscape? Well, when I was teaching, talking about how we tell our own history through these kinds of things was a great way to connect the past and the present for my students. Really obvious example. We were just talking about the cherry blossoms, and in an African-American history class, if you're going to teach about Thomas Jefferson, you're going to have to deal with the fact that he wrote the Declaration of Independence and yet enslaved people on a massive scale. He wrote the notes on the state of Virginia, which said horrible things about Black people. And yet there he was with Sally Hemings. I don't know why I'm having mental block with Sally Hemings, and, you know, having children with her and not necessarily freeing those children. So anyway, once you've gone over all that with a group of high school students, then I would say, well, what about the Jefferson Memorial? You know, it's one of the most beautiful memorials in our nation's capital. Should there be new signage? Should there be explanatory panels? You know, what should happen as we know this history? And it was always a very good way to engage students in the idea that, you know, history isn't dead, it isn't even past, kind of thing. Good. Monument Lab defines a monument as a statement of power and presence in public. And so to me, those things, the markers, the street names, the murals, those are monuments. They're not the kind of monuments that they counted in their census, and they're not traditional monuments, but they are, again, they're how we tell our own history in the landscape. And the way this process happens is that, first of all, we have to all recognize, and I'm sure, you know, you certainly know this, that history is not the past. It's an ongoing process of interpreting the past. The past does not change, but our understanding of it does. Historical interpretations often reveal more about the times in which they are written than they do about past events. And then most importantly for tonight, as our historical interpretations evolve, our monuments reflect new understanding. And that's not an automatic process. It's not like, oh, you know, now we're telling a more inclusive history. Let's just, you know, erect a bunch of monuments and take other things down. But with community organizing, with political will, with money, with timing, gradually we can change the story that we're telling in our landscape. And I think, you know, that's certainly clear in Philadelphia. A really good example of how this process works is the President's House Memorial. So I usually say, just to sort of flatter people, but I don't think they necessarily know if I'm speaking, I usually say, as I'm sure most of you know, Philadelphia was the nation's capital from 1790 to 1800. Now I can say it with no like thought bubble. Yes, we all know this. And so when President Washington and President Adams lived in Philadelphia, they lived at the president's house at what was then called 6th and High Street, later called 6th and Market. And once the capital moved to Washington, D.C., and that area around 6th and Market became much more commercial. The building was first converted into stores with a boarding house above. Fast forward to 1949. This is what that corner of 6th and Market looked like. And that Washington Hall clothing store, the walls, some of those walls were actually original to the president's house. But those buildings, along with many, many, many other buildings to the north of Independence Mall, were knocked down, cleared out, beginning in 1951 to make room for Independence Mall. And the site that had once been the president's house, there was a restroom facility built atop of it. There was a little plaque explaining that, you know, this toilet sits above, you know, the former home of presidents, but that was it. Now we're going to fast forward to the very early 2000s when the new Liberty Bell, it's no longer new, it was then new, Liberty Bell Pavilion was going up, and some archaeological work was done, and an amateur historian named Edward Lawler published an article in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography and said, this new pavilion, the entrance is directly adjacent to what were slave quarters that George Washington built when he knew he was going to be living at the Robert Morris House. And 2002, the reaction of Independence National Historical Park is, well, you know, we already wrote all the placards that are going to be in the new pavilion. We've gotten approval for them. So yeah, we're not really going to do anything about this. And historians like Gary Nash and journalists and community members kept pushing. And eventually the Park Service did compromise and say, okay, we will change some of the wording as people enter the Liberty Bell Pavilion. But then the next thing was, what about the president's house site itself? And some of you might know Michael Cord, who launched an organization called the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, or ATAC, and working with local politicians, keeping up grassroots pressure, they were able to get Park Service approval not only to build a memorial to the president's house, to you know, the history of the president's house, they were able to make it so that the focus of that memorial would be the enslaved people who lived there. And in 2010, that happened. So 2002, the Park Service says, yeah, we're not interested. 2010, this major, you know, memorial opens on Independence Mall that isn't so much about George Washington and John Adams. It's really about the lives of the enslaved people who lived there. And their names are all listed on a plaque. And I'm sure probably many of you bring your tour groups by the president's house. Okay, I've done a couple of tours. I haven't passed your very rigorous test, but I have done a few tours And when I've done Black History tours, I'm out of the business of doing Black History tours because I never did them for money, and there's very good tour guides out there, especially Black owned tour companies that I think should be doing it rather than me. But anyway, when I did these couple of Black History tours, when I was at the President's House Memorial, I would point down 6th Street to the location of Pennsylvania Hall. And how many of you are familiar with the story of Pennsylvania Hall? It looks like about half. This was what Mike had asked me to speak about. I'm going to try and sort of split the difference between people who know the whole story and people who aren't familiar with it. I do tell the story in my book. If you don't feel like purchasing my book, that's okay. You can't all purchase it. I don't have enough copies, but I did write an article about it for Hidden City that you can find. So the basics are that in Philadelphia in the 1830s, I'm sure many of you in your tours probably talk about Philadelphia as a home of abolition. That's certainly how we've liked to put ourselves out there to tourists, as city of brotherly love and the first abolition society and so forth. But in the 1830s, abolitionists were the minority. There were more people who supported slavery, partly because in the 1830s, we had a lot of Irish immigrants who saw Black laborers as competition for low-skilled jobs. And then we also had industrialists who were, their businesses were tied to the cotton in the South, and we had social relationships. So abolitionist groups, of which there were several, were finding it really hard to even find a meeting place because people wouldn't rent to them. So they decided that they would raise money and build their own kind of temple of abolition. And one of the groups really involved in fundraising was, whoa, this is like on a timer. This is really, shouldn't be. Whoops. I have to be careful of talking too long. It's doing timings that I didn't think were there. Okay, sorry about that. I guess that says I talked too long. Okay, so the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society was an interracial group of abolitionists. Lucretia Mott was one of the leaders. And they formed this anti-slavery society because, of course, the American Anti-Slavery Society didn't want them because they were women, but they were very instrumental in the fundraising. And so they built this beautiful building, Pennsylvania Hall, and it has bookstores and this grand meeting room and so forth. And the American anti-slavery women are going to hold a convention here in mid-May 1838. And on the first day of the convention, people kind of notice, what is going on here? Women are speaking in public. They're speaking out against slavery. And worst of all, Black and white people are mingling. So signs go up around the city. Whereas a convention for the avowed purpose of effecting the immediate abolition of slavery in the Union is now in session in this city, it behooves all citizens who entertain a proper respect for the right of property and the preservation of the Constitution of the United States to interfere forcibly if they must, italics theirs, the red and bold is mine, and prevent the violation of these pledges heretofore held sacred. We would therefore propose to all persons so disposed to assemble at the Pennsylvania Hall in 6th Street between Arch and Race on tomorrow morning, Wednesday, May 16th, at 11 o'clock and demand the immediate dispersion of said convention. And so people gather, and this first gathering, it's mostly kind of ruffian, street toughs, and so forth. And then the managers of Pennsylvania Hall actually go to the mayor of the city and say, we need protection. And he says, well, that's fine. Just cancel your speeches and give me the key to the building. And now I'm going to do a very short reading from the book. Yes, it was. Okay. In the evening, Swift walked from his office at the State House, now called Independence Hall, 2 blocks north to Pennsylvania Hall. After locking the building, he addressed the crowd, quote, "The managers had the right to hold their meeting, but as good citizens, they have, at my request, suspended their meeting for the evening. We never call out the military here. We do not need such measures. Indeed, I would, fellow citizens, look upon you as my police, and I trust you will abide by the laws and keep order. I now bid you farewell for the night." Thus, with a large pack of rabid foxes left in charge of the brand new hen house, Mayor Swift took his leave. Although the throngs that gathered the previous 2 nights had been composed mostly of young members of the laboring class, the crowd this night was different. It included men of means, merchants, professionals, and not a small number of Southern enslavers. Expecting that the mayor would turn a blind eye, the crowd became a mob intent on destruction. Dock workers from the nearby Delaware River post brought axes, crowbars, and wooden beams that were used as battering rams to knock down the doors. Street lamps were extinguished to obscure the illegal activity. The contents of the reading room and bookstore provided effective kindling for fires set in the Grand Saloon. The gas lamps in the interior of Pennsylvania Hall intensified the flames. By the time Mayor Swift was alerted to the chaos and returned with his police force in tow, they were vastly outnumbered. The mob, encouraged by its victory, spent the next few days threatening and attacking Black homes, churches, and even an orphanage. A few men suspected of being the Pennsylvania Hall arsonists were arrested and quickly released. Yes, and there were January 6th comparisons that were written about Pennsylvania Hall in the Inquirer. Okay, so as I said, few people were arrested and released. The police report blames the managers of Pennsylvania Hall for openly promulgating and advocating in it doctrines repulsive to the moral sense of a large majority of the community. And one thing I didn't say about Mayor Swift is that he has a quote that I have in the book that, the vast majority of Philadelphians are against you. What do you expect? And then in terms of these repulsive doctrines, they elaborate. The mass of the community could ill brook the erection of an edifice in this city for the encouragement of practices believed by many to be subversive to the established orders of society and viewed by some as repugnant to that separation which it has pleased the great author of nature to establish among the various races of man. So the God's will that there should be racial segregation was being violated because they let that happen of course people burned it down. Okay, so that's Philly, that is not city of brotherly love stuff. It's quite a remarkable story, and there's very little trace of it, which is why when I would give those tours, I would just point down the street to the Pennsylvania Hall marker that's in front of WHYY. It's not worth walking all that way. Yes. Yes, they turned the other way. And there's actually in the book, I make a comparison to Move, but I didn't want to read that aloud because, yes, we're, okay. And then there's also at 5th and Arch near the Mint Building, there is a marker for the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. But what I say in the book is if you really want to honor the memory of Pennsylvania Hall and the women of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, the best place to go is Fair Hill Burial Ground, because people like Lucretia Mott, Robert Purvis, other members of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society are buried there. And then I also think it makes sense because Fair Hill Cemetery had really fallen upon hard times. And it was a group of mostly women, interracial women, who were able to restore it and make it a community center, a center of learning, and so forth. I'm not going to let you get me. Yes. And there is this mural, which shows, it says Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, big picture of Lucretia Mott, and also shows the burning of Pennsylvania Hall. So in conclusion, this is pretty heavy history, and a marker, a mural, a monument isn't going to change the past. It's not even going to ensure a more just future. But as people told me again and again and again, as I was writing the book, it matters. These things matter. And rather than try and put it in my own words, I will share with you a part of the poem, The Hill We Climb, that was read by the young poet Amanda Gorman at President Biden's inauguration. Being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. So with that, this is how to stay in touch with me. I will be selling my books after I talk and get your questions and so forth. If you know other people who might be interested in hearing me speak, I'm doing a slew of events, and those are all on my website. If you know other groups or organizations or even book groups that you think might be interested in reading the book or hearing from me, you have my email, and you can also follow me on Instagram. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, but also hear your questions. So thank you very much. All right, looks like Ernest has a question. Is it? Yes. Yes.
You have missed the number one in your research. You have missed the number one source of information that everybody got their information from. You did not say a word about Carter G. Woodson. Don't tell me that's don't shoot. The man that invented,
Yeah.
If you get a Carter G. Woodson encyclopedia set, most of all of this is in it.
I sometimes do talk about Carter G. Woodson in my talk, in the sense that, like Charles Blockson, who was told Black people have no history, Carter G. Woodson's mission was really to expose and elevate and study Black history, but he only had so much time. So one of the things that he did was to just ask Black Americans to send letters, diaries, journals, and he would just print the raw primary sources in his Journal of Negro History, which, you know, of course, now is a treasure trove to current scholars. So you know, certainly respect and celebrate Carter G. Woodson. I talk about him a little bit in the final chapter of the book.
Course you did.
All right. All right. So
Also,
you got me.
these monuments, also the monuments and sculptures will not be defaced when they tell the actual history. For example, our latest problem at Independence Hall, somebody wrote slave trafficker across Robert Morris's statue that they can't get out. It did it say human trafficker? All right. If they told the truth about Robert Morris, no one would deface his sculptures. Like at the Jefferson House, they say Bob Hemmings was here with Thomas Jefferson. Nobody messed with the Thomas Jefferson House. These are all during the days of like the Floyd riots and things of that nature. And the what's the name of the guy that cited over? Okay, he had the recreation center, the judge. That's now the Marion.
Higginbottom?
No.
Oh.
No, not Lewis. Come on, the judge that cited over the. I didn't write anything down. I was trying to do everything off of memory. The Taney.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
The Taney
Taney.
Recreation Center is now called the
Marion
Anderson.
Anderson.
And the Taney Street, which runs north and south in Philadelphia, in different areas of Taney Street, they have changed the name already. They have the little red markers underneath in North Philadelphia. They changed the Taney Street. It's named after a woman state senator or something down off of Susquehanna Avenue and Diamond Street. That Taney Street was the little red marker underneath.
Okay.
I'll have to. Things like that. So there are some things that have been changed. And you also didn't talk about the multicultural community in between 5th and 6th Street across the street from the Pennsylvania Hall, which is now called the Constitution Center. Every time they dig in the Independence National Park area, a lot of times they find African artifacts that the artifacts don't lie, all right, that rewrite the American history. Like, for example, the secret slave servants tunnel for George and Martha Custis is a real actual name, all right? And then going further out into South Philly behind Independence Hall, you'll find an African cemeteries. For example, right across from Betsy Ross's house, where the new, well, they're not new anymore because we're old here, all right? It was a cemetery there, an African cemetery. And then you also didn't say anything about James Fortin. And then also,
okay, Ernest, I know just some other people want to have questions. That I didn't read you my entire book. So, and you already bought a book. And so there's plenty about James Fortin. And, you know, I didn't catch every little change in the city. No, he can write the sequel.
In Philadelphia, as much as they can find. And that's why there's not a lot of African presence up to today, because it was all mainly burned down. And there was one house they couldn't find. They couldn't find Absalom Jones's house. That's why it's still here.
Thank you.
When I was doing stories a couple years ago, I reached out to Amy because I realized that she had done the marker for the Lombard Street riot. I had a question for her though, Amy, that I know you also did the Nanny Goat riot, and I wrote to the Pennsylvania Museum and Historical Commission to ask if I could see because I was wondering what kind of submissions you have to make. They never replied. And I just wondered were you disappointed at all that you didn't get the second marker?
Well, again, it wasn't me, it was my
But you
students.
coordinate.
They were seniors at Masterman, so they had a lot of their own gumption in doing it. I'm just going to tell a story really quickly of how those marker applications came up. When I was preparing for the History of Philadelphia course, I read about all of these many riots that took place in Philadelphia. Some were Catholic Protestant, many were Black, white, that took place in Philadelphia in, the antebellum era. And I grew up in Philadelphia. I got a master's in history at Penn, and yet I had never heard of any of these, and it really shocked me. And so somehow I came up with this idea that I taught the Underground Railroad in this History of Philadelphia class by assigning different students different Underground Railroad related markers. And I had them present about the markers in class. And then I dramatically scratched my head and said, huh. Oh, and then we read about the riots. Okay, then they read about the riots. Then in class, I said, huh, it's really strange. There were so many markers about the Underground Railroad, which of course, is something that's much more comfortable to talk about. And there's none about any of these riots. And fortunately, one of the students took the bait and said, Mrs. Cohen, we should apply for markers. And I said, what a great idea. And so then they broke into groups, and the two strongest groups were the Nanny Goat riot marker application and the 1842 Lombard Street. And so we sent them both in, and the 1842 was accepted and the other one wasn't. But by the next year, I wasn't teaching the class and we didn't follow up. I did get a marker for Anna Elizabeth Dickinson. It's in front of the Trader Joe's on Arch Street, the 1300 block of Arch. Yeah. Yes.
I know you're no longer part of the school system, but how would you assess the current state of teaching African-American history, particularly Philadelphia history, African-American Philadelphia history in our school system today? Are we doing a better job? Have we, how much further do we need to go, if at all?
Here's what I can say. I mean, anecdotally, I don't always hear great things, but the current social studies leadership, in the school district of Philadelphia is excellent in terms of giving teachers opportunities to learn about African-American history, specifically Philadelphia history. And they're doing a big initiative right now to teach more local history in the African-American history course. I mean, I can say as a former classroom teacher that what a bureaucrat is putting on paper at 440 North Broad Street and what I'm doing in my classroom isn't necessarily going to match. But in terms of what's available and what's being made available to teachers, it's top notch.
On 12th Street, the William Still marker has been knocked down.
Yeah, when markers are knocked down, it should be reported to the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. So for example, the Alain Locke marker used to be somewhere, I think along 2nd Street. I forget, it's in the book, but because of where it was in the narrow streets of, the older parts of Philadelphia, it just kept getting hit by cars, not, in a vandalism way, but how people drive way. And so then a couple years ago, they rededicated it at the African American Museum, but that's under the purview of the Historical and Museum Commission.
The William Still marker hasn't been there for almost a year.
Don't look at me. And I know you want to do a ceremony, so should I wait? Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you, Zoom world.
Well, I was going to say a big round of applause for Amy Cohen. Thank you. All right, so next we're going to award our newly certified guides. Not all of them are here tonight, but some of them are here. So we had an exam on March 16th. We had 7 people take it and 6 of them passed, which is awesome. I think everyone here who has taken it and passed it would say it's a pretty comprehensive exam. I mean, I looked at it again when I was proctoring it. I was like, yeah, it's a good exam. So I'm glad I don't have to take it again now. So we have pins. Now, when I give you guys your pins, the back of this pin, I don't know what you call these funny kind of claspy backs, but they fall off. So don't wear it with this back. You will absolutely lose it. So what I recommend are the little rubber things for earrings that go on the back. You can probably order them on Amazon or something. Just get a bunch of earring backs, but find something else to put in the back. Bead shop in the city. Yeah. I used to go to like Claire's in the mall. They had those like earring backs and stuff, but definitely do not wear it on something with this back because you will absolutely lose it. And it's $10 to get a new one. And we don't have any more new ones. So don't lose it. We're getting more made, but I don't know how long that will take yet. So, or if you have the lanyard, that we have the APT lanyard, if you're putting it inside there, that's good, so you won't lose it, but you just don't want to lose it. Okay. So our first awardee tonight is here, Marion Parkinson. Where's Marion? There she is. Woo! Next, I have Alexandra Marigi. How do you say it? Alexandra. Can't really shake your hand, but I can elbow you. Good job, good job. Charlene Myers. Is that how you say it? Elbow. Lauren, I think I saw Lauren come out. Lauren McKinney. And then we had 2 more people who are not here tonight. So Joshua Meredith. We can clap for him, even though he's not here. And Raina Yancey. So Raina's not here. And the next thing I'm going to do is just offer those 4 new people who are here, the newly certified, if you want to come up and just tell us a little about yourselves, just a minute or 2. If you're uncomfortable with it, you don't have to, although I'd have to question your suitability to be a tour guide if you don't like talking in front of people, just saying. So anybody want to go first? Want to go? Alex will go first. When they come here, then they'll see you on the camera. Well, you know what? When you're a tour guide.
I bet they're good. So hi, I'm very, very excited. I used to do mural tours back in early 2000 and got away from it. I'm a fundraiser by trade, which I don't want to do anymore. So I saw this on the Greater Philadelphia Alliance, Cultural Alliance, and it looked like a really cool thing. They had the training program, and I thought, let me try this. And I was very pleasantly and continue to be very pleasantly surprised by everything that y'all do. Kudos to the board because I think you have really great programs. I will say that studying initially, I haven't done it for a long time, so it would like go in the brain and go out. And I was like, oh my gosh, all these things I have to know. So then I calmed down a little bit. I started doing notes. I started looking at the handbook and it stuck enough that I could pass. So yay. So thank you all.
Wow, there's a lot of you here. My name is Marion Parkinson. I'm a retired public librarian. I worked at Central Library where I used to give the tours before they trained actual docents to do that. Not all librarians are good tour guides. So I got the idea to do this when I was starting to contemplate retirement and knew I didn't want to become a couch potato. And at the time, I was having a lot of contact with the columnist from the Inquirer, Mike Newell, about all of the heroin, et cetera, in Kensington. And he took this test and he wrote a column about it. And I thought, if Mike can do it, I can do it. So I actually took the course through the Preservation Alliance pre-COVID, did all that. Their test is open book, I'm just saying. And then I was all set to get started on that when COVID came. And then I started seeing emails, getting emails from Marianne, and I'm back and I've done it. And I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I'm going to do something. Thank you.
I'm Lauren, and I have a background in. What? Okay. Okay. I'm Lauren, and is this okay? All right. I have a background in teaching higher education, teaching English literature. I stayed home with my kids for a while, and then I worked at Winter Tour Museum for a couple years as a guide. And I kind of got the itch to do the same thing in the city that I love so much. So I read about the conference and it was as if I had manifested it myself. So I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Charlene. Some of you may remember that a million years ago, I came to APT meetings as a representative of the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia. And if you're newer, you may not realize that APT was originally one of the civic partners of the encyclopedia, which is something we could reactivate again. But I'm so much enjoying your meetings and activities, and I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So I am currently teaching at Rutgers Camden. I'm about to retire and thinking about new things to do. Sometimes I give tours of the Cooper Street Historic District in Camden. And a long time ago, I was a Twilight tour guide with Independence, and I'm looking forward to starting that up again this summer. So thank you very much. And I think maybe I'm the last introduction, right?
Cool. Well, I think for any announcements, Mike can come up and help me. All right, Pam, you go for it. Well, let me just think if there's anything I want to say first. Oh, peer review. This Saturday If any of you want to practice doing your spiel in front of a site and getting feedback from other guides, particularly if you're a newer guide or less experienced guide or brand new, we're doing that this Saturday. So if you would like to help give feedback to the newer people, like you don't want to do a spiel, but you just want to give feedback, that would be helpful. Or if you want to present. So that's Saturday. Email me if you want to do that. Sunday is the tour with Tish over here of Old St. Joe's, 2:00 on Sunday. If you want to do that, just email Mike if you want to go. It's free. Was that all for this weekend? I feel like there was something else, but I'll think of it. We'll let Pam here for a second talk. Oh, yeah. And then next Tuesday morning, the 16th, right? 16th at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Jim's nodding me. They do the tour guide coffee break in the morning. So if you want to meet at the visitor center at 10 a.m. and get yourself a coffee and chat with other tour guides, kind of like a happy hour, but with coffee. You don't have to reply to anybody, just show up 10 a.m. at the visitor center.
Hi, it's me again. I'm here to shamelessly plug the book club. To address one of Ernest's questions, the book club selection for May is going to be Digging in the City of Brotherly Love by Rebecca Yaman. She's doing a book talk at Barnes & Noble at 16th and Chestnut on April 25th. You can register. There's a form in the newsletter where it announces the event. You can register online through us, or you can register at Barnes & Noble. And one of the things she talks about in the book are the remnants of buildings built in the African style and African pottery. She also talks about the African-American burial sites that are sprinkled all around the historic district of Philadelphia. The book is replete with drawings and photographs. She talks about the history and the politics of getting these things uncovered and published and all that. So I strongly recommend it. If you haven't read the book, but you want to join the meeting, by all means do. Like, say you want to know if you're interested in reading the book. The discussions, we try to keep it focused on the book, but we're tour guides, so it ranges all over the place with history. But I encourage anybody who has any kind of an interest, please don't think you have to read the book. You're not going to be asked to give a report. May 16th at 7 p.m. on Zoom.
And then one other thing, I don't know if anyone here was there, but on Tuesday morning, we did the active shooter training at the National Constitution Center. And the Park Service just emailed me. They're going to do another one May 1st. And I want to say May 21st. So if you missed it on Tuesday, I highly recommend it. It was amazing. The guy was really good. Oh yeah, Tish was there with me. Yeah, Nina was there. Carla was there. It was really good. The guy was very easy to understand, very entertaining, and made it easy to remember. There was some interactive, but it's just such a necessary thing for us to know. And I thought it was really empowering. Like, I felt really hopeful that should I get in this kind of situation, I would now have a chance to survive. So yeah, we actually had to do it. Like, they did interactive, like, simulations with brooms and wood blocks, not anything dangerous. So I don't remember. I'll put it in the newsletter. I don't remember where he said it was going to be. I literally just got the email today. But there will be other opportunities. So if you have any chance to take it, definitely take it. It was really good. And April 29th, we have a field trip to the center, Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I think it's 2 p.m. Fancier thing, yeah. So sign up for that, $21. That's on the APT store. And yeah, Vance, come and save. I knew there was something else this weekend. Vance is having a super cool event on Sunday.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate the play that you gave us in the newsletter. If you folks get the newsletter, you may have already heard of this, but there's a reminder that Sunday, we're going to be doing an event down at Front and South Street in a lot owned by the Society Hill Civic Association. Basically, the first actual tours, mini tours, brief tours being given on the Carolyn E. carriage. This is part of a growing trend worldwide where horse and carriage rides for tourists are being phased out because as a younger generation comes in, they just aren't able to put those blinders on and ignore what's going on with the horses, being forced to work on these. This is a carriage. There's many different designs worldwide, but they have in common that they look like a traditional horse and carriage. They're very ornate and Victorian looking and very charming. And you get that same effect of being able to go on a slow moving vehicle where you can get tourist information. We're going to be doing just basically a sample version of this to kick this off. And, you know, I'm working with Carriage Horse Freedom, a woman named Janet White's the one that brought this carriage in. But, you know, she's been working on this for more than a year. And I've talked to some of you. She talked to some of you. And there was some interest, you know, looking down the road in maybe doing your tour with her. So if you have any interest in seeing the carriage live, taking a ride, whatever, come down to Front and South Street. Sunday, we're going to be there from 11 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. So, and I'm going to be doing, this is on the date that Carolyn Earl White founded the women's branch of the Pennsylvania SPCA, which became the Women's Animal Center, which is now in Bensalem. This is the organization that started the first animal shelters in America. He was an amazing advocate for animals. And I'm going to be basically telling the story of her life as we go on like a 2-block long tour in a little over 5 minutes. Just again, it's a taste. We like to call it a taste of the future. So if you have any interest in seeing if you might be interested in doing that sometime in the future, hope to see you there. Thank you.
All right, I think that's it. Anything on Zoom?
So just wanted to pass on, so not really an announcement, but since tour season's picking up and daylight savings, it's later out. Just a heads up about changing of hours. The Bourse, even though it's listed as being open till 8 p.m., they've started closing their bathrooms at 4 p.m. Also, the Wawa at the corner of 6th and Chestnut, they've started closing their bathrooms at 3 p.m. So as you're doing like evening tours, definitely keep that in mind. Keep that in plan, because even though the buildings may be open, a lot of places, because of a variety of reasons, are closing their bathrooms like in the afternoon very early. So this might be something that we as APT could reach out to organizations and such, because trust me, guests are really cranky on tour if they have to hold their bladder the whole time. And 5 o'clock seems like it should be a reasonable time to still have a restroom, but sadly 4 and 3 o'clock seems to be becoming the norm. And a lot of places are now limiting access.
All right, anybody else have anything? Anybody want to share any events or anything going on? No, we're good. So Lois just asked on your way out, if you did not sign the sign-in sheet, please sign it in. We want to keep statistics of how many people come and who comes. And yeah, come and chat with Amy or get a book. And thank you all for coming.